May 6, 2019, Finance Committee, call to order. If we could stand for the pledge. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we start the fun, I believe everybody got a invitation for May 22nd at the JCS?
Yes.
Yep.
If you want to go, if you don't want to go. Yeah, it's an open house to show what the school does, and it's presentations by, I think, 3 of the grades.
My computer also had trouble this week, so.
So we have that. You should have also gotten an invitation from Dr. Baeta for a meeting on 5:30 at the Norton Middle School at 7 p.m. So hopefully everybody can attend.
Same day.
No, it's the following week. I think it's a Thursday, the 30th, 7 p.m. And if you can post a very generic agenda, just basically that we're there at the Norton Middle School in the auditorium.
Library?
This is the middle school.
Thought it was,
Library?
no, I thought he said the auditorium because
You
it's
might have.
all 3 groups.
Could be.
Okay, so this is May 30th,
May 30th,
7 p.m.
7 p.m., Norton Middle School. I believe it's the auditorium.
At what?
That is the Thursday.
Auditorium.
At the auditorium.
Also, I think this budget season has brought about the wish from many of information they wish they had, or information that came too late and they wish they had earlier, to really, at times, come to a decision. I think it's incumbent upon us, before the next season that we go through this, that we come up with a list. This is what we would like to see from various departments. Give them a heads up. And September, October, November, here's what we're going to be asking you in the upcoming season. And therefore, they're prepared to present it to us. We have, in a sense, pre-asked a lot of questions that I know a lot of people still have. And hopefully, the process goes a little smoother. So I think as soon as we get done with, special town meeting, or the annual town meeting, and then the special in June, we need to meet again to start thinking of what our priorities are for the next season. Any questions?
I think that sounds great.
Mike?
Paul DiGiuseppe, the Town Planning Economic Development Director, is here. As you know, the Finance Committee, unfortunately, the newspaper didn't publish their public hearing in time, so they had to delay it. So you're not going to have any recommendation from the Planning Board until the day of town meeting. But Paul is here to go over the articles with you anyway, so you have some heads up on what is in the articles that the Planning Board would be putting forward, and ask him any questions.
Good evening.
First, I'd like to start by thanking you all for supporting our request for funding to help with the master plan. We're really excited about that, and we're going to be launching that very soon. As Mike mentioned, I just wanted to go over, just pretty briefly, there are 4 articles being proposed at next Wednesday's town meeting. They were largely put in by staff and the planning board to deal with more immediate pressing needs. The last one I'll get to was submitted by it's dealing with signage regulations or for a billboard. But the first one proposal, it was submitted by the planning board, and it was in response to something that came up recently when they were reviewing a site plan and special permit, when they realized they don't have the ability, if an applicant comes in and they have a driveway width, our bylaws say it has to be, if it's an industrial project or a commercial project, it must be X number of square feet. And in the case of the industrial project, it's a requirement of 50 feet, which is very wide. Town council advised that they couldn't actually grant a waiver to reduce it, that it had to go to the zoning board because the bylaws did not specifically say that they could reduce it for driveway widths. So one of the applications that we will be voting on next week gives the planning board the ability to provide waivers for any special permit or site plan if an applicant comes in and wants a driveway waiver, which is actually a very fair thing because this went to in this case, it went to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and some of the comments of the board members were, we're not reviewing this project as the planning board is, so they were kind of behind. It was a little more difficult for them to make that decision rather than the board that's been involved with this for, in this case, several months. So they do have opportunities in other areas to grant waivers, but they didn't here. So they drafted the language and voted on it a month ago or so. So that's one that's going forward. Question? Yes.
What number
I think this is 18.
I don't have.
16. Use regulations, maybe?
This would be the driveway.
Thought it was 18.
18. Yes.
All right, so this is 18.
Yes. I'm sorry. I don't have the.
They want-
Can I borrow
Yeah,
one?
take one.
Yeah, thank you. So does anyone have any questions on Article 18? Yes,
So can you go over that one more time? I got
Sure.
confused about what board could do what board and what board.
Sure.
Really confused.
okay, so the planning board has the authority to review site plans and special permits. So if an application comes in and someone wants to build a 10,000 square foot building and it's vacant, that would go through the planning board. And if everything works perfectly and no waivers are requested, then the planning board has the ability to just go ahead and approve or deny. But where it gets a little more confusing is when an applicant comes in and says, I can't meet that 50-foot driveway width requirement, but I can show you that 30 feet or 35 or 40 feet works fine. In that case, though, right now, under current regulations, the Zoning Board of Appeals is actually the entity that grants waivers. I mean, that's what the Zoning Board of Appeals essentially issues variances. But in certain circumstances, the Planning Board has the ability to do so. But it has to be within something that they're reviewing, like a site plan. But again, the bylaw doesn't, it gives them certain opportunities to grant waivers and it doesn't elsewhere. And because it grants these specific waiver rights, town council has said you can only give waivers where the bylaw says you can, and if it doesn't say it, then it has to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So is there anywhere where we'd be bypassing notification of abutters? If it impacts them in any way, shape, or form?
No, because the abutters list is still based on the property address itself, so it's still a 300-foot radius regardless of if it's a variance for the zoning board or if it's a site plan or special permit. So they would be getting noticed of it.
So would the planning board give a variance on, say, the 50-foot width driveway? Is that just during construction, or is that like forever? 50 feet's what it is, but they're saying you can have 30.
Well, it would be during it had to be prior to the planning board issuing the site plan. Because the approval had to be what they end up constructing. So if the site plan ultimately says it's 30 feet or 35 feet, that's what they have to construct. So the building commissioner and I we'll go out when a project's being built to make sure it's being built consistently with the site plan. So it had to sequentially or simultaneously go to the zoning board, but the zoning board had to weigh in before the planning board could make their final decision. So it could become an issue for an applicant, because if they have to wait, we have to get it scheduled for zoning board, so it's possible a project could be delayed because of it.
Do we distinguish between commercial and light commercial?
Not in our bylaw, not by our building, well, by building permits, yes, but in this case, no. If it's commercial, it's commercial, so it's a broad category. So if it's industrial as well,
I think maybe if you had, it would streamline the process if you had a light commercial category, no?
a zoning
Light
category?
commercial.
A light
Commercial.
We could certainly look into that. I mean, right now, we have village commercial and commercial.
Yeah.
We only have the two commercial categories, but you're saying we should be looking at maybe a light commercial or,
Well, it might be able to, if you classified it, because, I mean, a village commercial is more well, it includes residential, includes
right,
a multi, where light commercial is specific versus commercial.
Right.
Commercial's more, it's between industrial and light commercial. And
Right.
Light commercial is very, would alleviate the driveway issue, would alleviate a lot of things.
right. And I should clarify, too, that in the context of the proposal, it's based on the use proposed, but the use has to align with the zoning district. But in this case, what they're saying is when we get a site plan in, the zoning's already established, but if it's they want that ability to grant a waiver for any industrial use or commercial use, but we would have to determine in advance that that use was already allowed in that. But the idea of a new district is something we'll have to look at as we're reviewing the master plan, because there could be new categories that come about. In fact, as we're working on the village center plan, while we're still working on a report, we've had internal discussions about creating a new village commercial or village center district that encapsulates more of the historic aspects of that area. So we could.
I just know other towns do practice that. They
Right.
differentiate.
It's wonderful we only have 5 zoning districts, but it has its limits too. But when I worked in Austin, Texas, we had over 400 zoning districts, so we don't want to go that way.
No.
That's a bit much.
Thank you.
Walter? Can you tell us a little bit more about the concerns the Zoning Board of Appeals had, and why did they turn?
Well, in this case, it was dealing with Condyne's Blue Star Business Park over on 123 and Leonard Street. It's a large project. This phase of it was over 400,000 square feet. They had one aspect that they had to review early on in the process, but to ask them to review driveway widths, that are serving certainly 5 buildings, it could be difficult for someone to view it for the first time. They hadn't not received background information from the applicant and us prior to that, as though the planning board had, because at that point, the planning board had probably 5 public hearings on it. So in a way, the zoning board was starting from scratch and having to make a decision. And they obviously don't want to just rubber stamp something. So it creates a bit of an onus on them for something like that.
So they had no objection other than just the short time frame they had to review the application?
Right, they did approve it ultimately. They had deliberation on it, but they ultimately did.
Peter?
I only have issue with this is it reminds me of what we just reversed with the solar panel stuff, is that we're making a change to something that seems, I don't want to say it's short-sighted, but it's up to the applicant to know that they're making an industrial, commercial thing, and they know they have to know what the rules are as 50 feet, and they're applying for something less when they're making their design. They should know they have to go for a zoning board of appeals. I mean, that's what they should know as businessmen, and it's their job. I don't think it's, I don't know, I find it, I don't think we'd be shortcutting or taking away the power of the zoning board of appeals and applying it to the planning board. I don't know. That's me. That's what we're doing. We're taking some authority out of the zoning board of appeals and putting it in. And I don't know if that's good or bad. It's not my business. I'm just-
Is this to save money?
I wouldn't say that's the case. I think what had happened was they had previously granted these waivers in the past. It was brought up that they didn't have the right to do it, so we went to town council. And town council said, no, you don't have the ability to do this regardless of what you've done in the past. So
You mean Lou, planning board or zoning board?
historically speaking, the planning board had been issuing these
Been
waivers.
doing these even though they turned out they didn't have the.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
I think it's more of the opportunity to keep a project in their shop.
Yep.
That's exactly what it is.
Amy?
I mean, I think that if we're trying to attract more business to town, that we need a process that is friendly to people that want to do business here. So with that in mind, since they have been doing it this way in the past, until they learned they weren't allowed to technically, it seems like it would make sense to move forward with changing the bylaw to allow them to do that going forward.
I think that was, again, they were the ones that drafted this language and voted on it. They initiated it.
So, another thing, so if the planning board routinely allowed this variation and the zoning board kind of had no problem with they routinely do it, why is it the 50 feet if routinely it's less? But what's the 50 foot? Why is that a 50-foot magic number? Is it fire trucks getting in, coming, going? Busy,
I don't have the history behind it, but I think it's excessive. And the building commissioner and I have gone out to sites here and in Mansfield, and driveways we didn't find any that were 50 feet. Like even in Mansfield, at their large complex, they were roughly about 40 feet wide.
Okay.
I would, down the road, maybe this fall's town meeting, I would like to change that standard. Give more flexibility, say within a range of, say, 30 to 45 feet, but 50 feet, period, that's a lot. And in this case, too, this was in an environmentally sensitive area. You want to try to, as much as possible, shrink that impervious cover so more water drains. So even a project like at Condyne's other development over on Commerce Way, the driveway, Commerce Way itself is 30 feet wide. Commerce Way itself is that. So, I mean, when you're at the mouth of the turning radius, it widens. It's much wider than that. But there are other considerations we should be thinking about and trying to provide some flexibility. But 50 that's excessive.
Okay.
And if you're thinking about if you're a pedestrian walking that's 30 feet's a lot quicker to cross than 50. I mean, granted, you probably don't have a lot of pedestrians along there, but if we're doing this on Leonard Street, who knows? Down there, there's residences down the street east of there and people along 123. And, if that project goes forward, we're hoping that they were going to be providing a trail along the Canoe River. Hopefully people would be walking to it or biking to it.
Paul?
This applies only to commercial or industrial, not to residential.
Correct.
Because I can remember before this committee, planning board hearings, where were very hotly contested. One was where there had been one house, and they wanted to make the driveway more of a street and put 2 more houses in, but it turned out the width of the street was not the issue, but they didn't have enough radius coming in off the main drag. It was Reservoir Street.
Oh, okay.
They didn't have enough for fire trucks and so forth, and all hell broke loose in terms of whether or not we would approve it or not, and we eventually didn't. They couldn't build the houses because they didn't have, the street would be wide enough, but the radius going in would not be wide enough.
Too
and
tight.
We said no, and this can get to be a pretty ticklish
Right.
sort of thing. I understand the idea that the planning board, who holds all the hearings on site plans and everything else, is probably much more current with it than suddenly saying this has got to go to zoning board of appeals. It hasn't had anything to do with it up until that point. But I think we need to be careful about what we're granting and what we aren't in terms of this. And
And keep in mind, this is only when there's a site plan or special permit in front of the planning board. So it's through a public process,
commercial or industrial properties.
right? On to the next one? Okay. The next one was actually one that I've initiated, the next change. And it's actually the way the articles are listed, I believe it would be under both 16 and 17. But this has to deal with protected uses that the state has. In fact, most states protect uses, religious facilities, and educational uses. And what this is proposing to do is say that in all of our zoning categories, except industrial, educational facilities and religious facilities are allowed what we call by right. So if you look at the use table, it says, yes, you can do it. But in industrial, it said, industrial and commercial, ours says right now you have to do it by a special permit. But there's something in state law, it's called the Dover Amendment, and it basically says that you can't add any additional zoning regulations to educational uses, religious uses, and it goes beyond that to cover things like group homes. But in this case, these were 2 that I flagged that appear to be inconsistent with that Dover Amendment, as well as case law that said, there were some case law that I came upon that said for educational and religious uses, you should not be applying requiring special permits for them. So just trying to make this consistent with state law. And it's simply just saying if you're in commercial or industrial and you're proposing an educational facility or a religious facility, you can do it by right instead of having to apply for a special permit. My concern is that someone could challenge that. Something came up recently in the last few months that had to deal with group homes, dealing with the special permits, whether or not we required it. It resolved itself when the application got withdrawn, but there were questions of whether or not there were requirements that would kick in, if we could even do a special permit or not. And so I had to immerse myself in the Dover Amendment, and I just feel like this would give us a better alignment with state law.
Walter? So you said you discovered this. Has town council weighed in on it?
I believe they have, yeah, yes.
Aaron?
And what did town council say?
This was, they would have, I assume since I didn't hear anything, that they're okay with it.
Peter?
So in effect, are you essentially removing 175-4.4? It's like a strike through to the whole thing. Is that whole section being removed?
No, just a special permit for commercial and industrial.
This is under table 4.2, under residential. And we're
I
just,
see that, but I was talking about the other section, sorry.
oh, we'll get to that.
All right,
We'll get to that.
I'm way ahead of
Okay.
this. Sorry. I'm looking
We're
at-
almost there. We're almost there. That's the next
No
one.
questions on the first table, no.
Okay, anything on this one? Okay, so the next one does deal with, what we're trying to do here is allow passive outdoor recreational uses in town. The only provision that we currently have for camping, and actually, we don't allow it, where we struck it all out, is you'll notice that in every zoning district next to campsite, it says no. And this was proposed by myself and Jen Carlino, our conservation agent, because she's working with some of the campgrounds, including Camp Edith Reed and a few others, to allow passive recreational. I mean, this is basically for kids to go out and camp, just put tents out. But we thought under our current bylaw that we actually didn't allow it, since our only definition said you couldn't do it. So what we did was we more thoroughly defined what we meant by camping and beyond that too, but passive outdoor recreational uses, and allow them by special permit. So they'd still have to come in all the zoning districts except industrial, which we would say, no, don't do it there. But all the others, they would have to go forward to the planning board and ask for a special permit. And in fact, I know Jen has drafted it and is waiting for the town meeting in order to submit it. But she's working with 5 of the campsites to try to get them ready to go this summer. So that's what that's for. Of course, we also then added, we wanted to make sure we talked about defining what passive recreational meant, including things like parks and picnic groves, but we also needed to talk about what's not passive, so we included definitions for amusement parks and commercial campsites. At this point, we just left those as no. We really weren't trying to go there just yet. I don't have a sense of where the public is on that. This, again, was more of just a reaction to try to make sure we can get the passive campsites going forward.
Mike, did we change this a couple years ago with, maybe it's more than a couple, with whoever wanted to do that thing out on the reservoir? Wanted to make something out of one of the islands, and everybody was like, no.
Zip line.
The zip line, so didn't we change everything to no?
Yeah, I don't remember on that.
I thought we did. I thought the reaction was, whoa, we gotta stop this.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Sort of reaction. I don't know quite what we did, but that was the reaction.
And he died.
So at least in this definition, now we're coming back a little from the edge.
Right.
the ledge, and basically saying, well, if you're just kind of, a beach or a park, that's okay, but commercial stuff
Right.
still not.
RVs and whatnot.
Okay.
And I'm not, right now, it's just, we were really just trying to keep a limited scope on this.
Yep.
But down the road, the town might feel different about that.
So there's no camping in town at all?
Not by our bylaw, which,
How do the Boy Scouts do it?
I have no comment on that.
so we're trying to fix that.
They don't do it in town, John.
I mean, that seems to be a rather benign use. And we're just trying to fix that.
And the town forest.
Town Forest. I've been there a few times myself.
We've got these 2 definitions, amusement park, commercial campsite. Right?
Yes,
You're going to insert them in 175.
correct, in the definitions section, section 2.
But are they going to be how are they going to be listed? No, yes, special permit?
At this point, we just included them under table 4.3 that just says passive outdoor recreational uses such as parks, beaches, but not including amusement parks.
But not including amusement parks and commercial
Right.
campsites. Then you've got these definitions
Yes.
of those two things. But what are they going to be?
At
Since
the,
they're not included
Right.
under special permit,
right.
what are they going to be included under? No, special permit, or yes?
I think at this point, they're not in here, so they would be a no, we don't have a category for them at this
Right,
point.
So that these, if we adopt these, they'll be listed like in these other things, but with a no.
Correct.
Right, that doesn't show up on.
Doesn't show up here, yeah.
Doesn't show up on
That's
any of
implied.
this.
I don't like the implied part.
But our definition is just saying that these are not, I should correct, well, not the definition, but under the uses, under 4.3, it's just saying that these are not, amusement parks and commercial campsites are not considered passive recreational uses, but we don't have, but you are correct, we do not have a use in the rest of the use charts for amusement parks. So I may be wrong to say that it's a no. It's silent. It's silent about them.
But
we're
when we have
making
them in
the-
there with no categorization, we say that
Right.
they're not, you can't get it under special permit. That's clear.
And, well, what you can't
Well, I mean,
claim is
by this thing, it's-
right, what an applicant couldn't claim is it's not a passive recreational use. So we're just saying,
It just says not including amusement
Right.
parks and commercial
Right.
campsites, so that's pretty specific. If they're
Right.
not included under 175.43,
correct,
and in fact, you even define them. And then
Right.
we have the definitions for them on 175.4, but we don't say what.
what do we do with them?
We don't allow them at all.
And I said, without that, I don't see the purpose of it.
So you're just recommending we should make some recommendation for,
Aren't you eliminating all commercial uses? You have passive recreation,
right,
and under commercial uses, you're just taking out campsites,
right.
and you're not putting in amusement parks and commercial campsites, so they're not allowed anywhere. Is that what?
That's the outcome of it, yes.
Couldn't you just add a row for amusement parks and commercial campsites and just put N?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the ambiguity?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Um,
Can we
Okay.
change that now, or is it too late? It's too late.
Well, it hasn't been, it's
Well,
too late to change
The warrant,
the warrant.
unless we do an amendment like we did with the more than
Right.
3-year contract piece
Correct. We would have to amend it.
on the floor.
Well, we can recommend this to the planning board,
And they would have to make a recommendation.
correct?
yeah, they
Yeah.
can bring it to us however they recommend it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
ahead of time,
Ahead of-
before our meeting.
Yeah,
Because if we're mentioning something and then being silent, that's,
doesn't make,
Doesn't make
it
sense.
doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
Using it,
Yeah.
at very least.
So if
Yeah.
we're mentioning it, we should at least
And I,
indicate what we want to do with it.
I would say, at a minimum, if we have to leave it as is for next week, we should put this on a list to be addressed at fall town meeting.
Sure. But I can recommend,
Hanging out there indefinitely.
but I can forward your recommendation to the planning board, just to recommend adding amusement park and commercial, and then to the use tables, but just no across the board for those.
yeah.
Okay,
What they want.
okay.
And was that,
Yeah, that's all I,
Rick?
I just have a question. Get back to 16, 175, 4.2. What type of appeal do the neighbors have?
Well, if you have a special permit, then there is an appeal process. If it's allowed by right, you do not, because then it's just building permits. But again, these are, I think if you look at state law, they are treated more special than other uses. Agriculture, group
We have
homes.
A lot of open land that, and we have neighborhoods as well, and it's basically coming in and taking a piece of property, changing the, I don't say the culture, but changing the neighborhood descriptive or whatever, and I just think that if there's a process to appeal that, you know, it could be sticky.
It could be, but religious and educational facilities are normally viewed, oftentimes they're viewed as being compatible with a neighborhood. You think about schools and churches, certainly back in, I don't even say the old days, but typically they were found in neighborhoods. Not always. I mean, plenty of schools and churches now have, big parking lots and lots of cars coming into them. But again, what we were intending to do is align with state law and the case law on them.
But you even have a yes for R40. That's,
Well, that was already there. That was already there.
oh, okay.
It's interesting that in our two most intensive districts, they said no, I'm assuming, because I don't know why it would not have been allowed by right in commercial. Industrial, I get it, that you might not want to have a school there. I get that, but I'm not, my understanding and reading through some of the case law, that we are walking a fine line with that.
Yeah. No, I'm just bringing it up. I just,
Yeah.
kind of think forward that, if you look at, way in the last 20 years, the town has developed, and there's still pockets around.
Mhm.
And, just as long as there's some recourse that can be,
Right. So the last one is, this was submitted by an applicant. Okay. And this has to deal with digital electronic billboards. In fact, this was proposed back in 2015. I don't know the entire history of it. It had been proposed, but it didn't make it to town meeting. And I'm not sure if it even made it to the planning board. But what this is attempting to do is to allow a large digital, Mike's passing out some examples of it, but a large billboard where right now we currently do not allow them, but this would allow them in property zoned industrial that are within 2,000 feet of 495. And just based on that limiting factor, there's really only 2 sites where this could go up. And Mike's handing out something that I think kind of indicates where they would like it to go. But, next one. But essentially, it could be over on Commerce Way or South Washington Street, really 3. Those 2 areas, and then possibly at the Blue Star Business Park. And what this says is that you have to be an industrial within 2,000 feet of it, and it could only be approved by special permit. These are large signs. Again, they're digital, they're LED lighting, and just to give you some of the specifications of it, it could be as high as 14 feet by 48 feet wide. They would have to be back about 500 feet from a residence. So it couldn't be any closer than 500 feet to a residence. And they can't be within 1,000 feet of one another. So you could have 2 possibly, but it's not clear yet if this actually meant on the same site. Back in 2015, it made it clear you could only do 1 on a site. This doesn't do that, but it does say it's within 1,000 feet. So I guess that could mean multiple sites.
I'm just curious, this did come up to town meeting before. We were going through a revenue projection, and then this got shut down because residents there were opposed. I think it was by the extended stay.
Yes. Yeah.
So
we actually-
how is this?
That was a different, if I remember correctly, we actually moved it forward, we recommended it.
Right.
And it was a PSA, it's a public service advertisement sign, that they would change every 12 seconds, that message. And they're up on 24, they're up on 95.
Yeah.
And it's all, PSA. But they were big, and clearly the residents thought differently. The vote was different, but
Right.
we did recommend it back in, I don't know how many years ago that was.
Right, so how is this now different than what we were?
I guess the hope is, I can remember when I went to Keith Silver and said, why aren't there sidewalks out here on East Main Street? And he said, don't bring that up. Last time that came up, people went crazy. Everyone was against it. And I said, well, I'm going to bring it up. And people were all for it, and they wanted them to go further. And so then after that, I said, so why don't we have a bike trail on the old railroad bed? And he said, oh, that was worse than the sidewalks. Don't bring that up. I said, I'm going to bring that up. And everyone was in favor of it. So I think the hope is that as there's been more of these signs put up across the Commonwealth, that people see them and they understand them more. And, this is an opportunity for the town to receive some revenue, which would be $300,000 per sign. So, plus, as Rick had said, that we'd also have time on there to put events that are happening in Norton, and Norton businesses would get time on there at a discount rate. And I sent around some information to you. One is the study that was done by MassDOT, who obviously regulates these signs, and they have to be approved by MassDOT, and they're not going to allow signs to be put up along the highway if they felt they were going to be causing accidents, because they permit them. They're the ones, the state would get sued if they permitted signs that were causing accidents. And the other information I gave you is just to show how these signs are highly regulated. So they have computerized devices on the signs that will regulate the amount of light that's emitted from the signs,
The brightness.
depending on how light it is outside at the time. And also, this light is directed. It's not like a billboard where there's big floodlights shining in the sky. So there is no pollution going up into the sky, light pollution from these signs. And also, we passed around a circle around the signs. They measure it in light candles or something like that.
Foot candles.
Foot candles, that's, and that'll show you how far the light will project and where it becomes zero. And behind the signs, there's virtually no one would see anything. So I know there was one subdivision close by, and they did come to a selectmen's meeting. We explained this to them again. I don't think it swayed their opposition as of yet, but behind the signs, it's virtually black. So we're just hoping that as this gets presented one more time, and the proponent will come to the town meeting to go over information for everybody at the town meeting.
This was just for way of information. This was presented to the selectmen last Thursday. It was a pretty good presentation. Does bring up something somewhat unrelated in that proposal, the guy indicated, and I'm just gonna throw out numbers here because I don't remember them specifically, of $20,000 a year for 20 years, or
No, that
That was the solar guy.
that was the solar power.
okay, sorry.
That's all right.
Same concept, though. 20,000 a year or a one-time payment of like 370,000. And I know a lot of people were like, I'd rather get 20,000 a year. I think when those opportunities come up, we actually need to do an evaluation of the time value of money, because 20,000, 20 years from now is really not 20,000. Because of inflation and this, that, and the other thing, it's a lot less. So if you can get a one-time sum, depending on what it is, sometimes that's better.
And that's what, in the previous mitigation agreement last time, it was 150,000 up front and 10 or 15,000 a year for so many years. So this time, it's 300,000 up front.
Yep.
And then we should hold on to that money and keep it in our capital.
Yeah,
And only
yeah,
spend
OPEB.
20,000 of it a year.
Peter?
I only have concerns, one, I have concerns of the street that was nearby for the last time we had this. This looks like it's the same kind of proposal, I don't know if it's the same one or not, but very similar. Two is, today's May 6th. It's the first time I'm hearing of it, not that I have to be informed as much, but it seems kind of quick to have, I don't know, it seems quick. Have people been informed enough? I can't raise my own opinion.
Yeah, just a couple things on that. The site previously was closer to that neighborhood. So this is where they're proposing now. This is the Plantation Products Building. And previously, they were proposing down here on this site,
Okay.
which was closer to that neighborhood, so it's moved further away. And they did present in January to the Board of Selectmen, and that's when the neighbors were at that meeting before it moved forward on the warrant.
Mike?
I know there has to be some sign off on this. I mean, after it's all built, is there somebody who has the authority to guarantee that all these claims are met? Said, yes, there will be no light behind us, the angles will be, the brightness. Now, who gets to
Right.
sign off on that?
Well, this application is to allow a special permit approval, so that would be the planning board. And then the state itself would, but the planning board, we would have to ensure that the conditions that they've laid out, whatever gets approved, has to be met. So,
Just taking it to the next level, let's say it's up, and it doesn't meet the requirements that we are expecting it to, and for whatever reason, I'm just thinking
Sure.
this to the extreme, and they can't change it. Can we have them just take the whole thing down? Or, I mean, that's the extreme, but,
I would, I guess the answer is we could, but let's design it right up front so we don't have that problem, because that's just a nuisance for people around it. It's certainly the cost of demolishing anything that goes up and you have to take it down it's not, that's just bad all around, so.
That would just be a lawsuit of, each side
well, I guess
proving
that's
the
getting to the
other.
extreme, but, there is, I mean, who knows? You have to think of, anything that could happen, might happen.
Right, but we can put monitoring in there, but again, you build that, it's going to be really critical to get it right in the design stages.
And also, the planning board will, when they do the site plan review, they'll have to put up a bond. So if they're not meeting
Yeah.
their requirements, we have their bond.
Right, and they wrote that in here as well for the decommissioning of it.
Oh, all right.
So is this going to be installed on private property or?
It can be, it doesn't,
It can't be on state property.
Okay, so
It
it's
will be on
private
private,
property.
and it will be taxable.
That was my next question.
Good question.
Amy?
I'm somewhat comfortable with this whole concept only because this note from MassDOT is dated 2011. And just looking at the list on the back, I know for sure there are several more of these that have gone up since this list was made. There's one on 95 North in Canton now.
Yeah.
There's several others as you go up 93 into the city.
Yep.
There's one in 24 in West Bridgewater.
So I feel like those communities would probably not have moved forward if they had talked to other communities that have done this and didn't feel like it was a good thing.
And also, the developer agreed that, as they did in Sharon, they put one up in Sharon, and Sharon had an issue with their radios in that area. So they put a repeater on the sign, and they'll do the same for us over on this sign. So that area of town is covered.
Rick?
I'm just gonna extend it one more step. So if it goes to a private property owner, what happens if that property gets sold? What happens if the contracts gets vacated?
Well, I can tell you, the special permit runs with the property. So if there's an approval, special permit and site plan, it actually runs with the land itself, not with the owner. So
So if the property owner,
if the property changes ownership, we're still, if they're going forward with that sign, we're still going to hold them responsible for what was approved in the special permit and site plan.
So the new.
If the new owner decides to go forward with it. We
Yeah.
can't make someone build something, but if they do build it,
Yep.
we will say you have to
Yep.
do it by these standards unless you want to come in and amend it, but then you'd have to go back to the planning board.
no, I was just thinking if the owner sells a property or it goes into some sort of receivership, where's the catch for the town? Where
Yeah, I think in any circumstance where we have a approval of projects, all we can do is say within 2 years, 3 years, if you haven't built your project or substantively started building your project, your permits expire.
okay, so
So that's a typical condition, that you do have to commence within 2 or 3 years.
So how long is the permit good for? The sign permit?
Well, there's nothing in here, I mean, it would be dealt with as a special permit, so once you've commenced construction and we verify it, then, one of the things we would do after the planning board issues the special permit, then we would work with them to get a construction plan together, or they would tell us, we don't tell them how to do it, but we'd want to make sure that all the departments are aware of what the construction schedule is.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen them, they seem, I see the ones on 95 in Canton, right after Neponset Street, and they,
This isn't something that dropped out of the sky yesterday.
Right, and if your question is after it's built, I'm sure the developer, the sign developer, is gonna have a lease agreement where it goes in perpetuity. If the property's sold, they hold on to their lease agreement.
right, but if the town should have some sort of penalty clause with the vendor.
Well, if they were to sell the sign, in the agreement, they would have to let us know, and this agreement would carry forward with the new.
But if they didn't, say the property owner says, okay, the new one says, I don't want that sign, and I'm gonna give you value 1.5 over market value, well, that seller's gonna say, okay, I'll take the hit, I'll amortize the cost, but the town has to be protected as well.
So we're gonna get our money up front. So you're saying if the owner of the property sells it to someone else and that person doesn't want the sign there?
You're gonna say, so they'll pay that contract out for 20 years.
To us?
Yeah.
No, we're getting the money up front.
Money up front.
I thought you just said there's two options.
No, that's for the solar.
The solar.
Okay,
In the old previous
The old
agreement,
one was like that.
it was like that, but this, we're getting our
all
money
right,
up
so
front.
that's fine, okay.
Yeah, you can do whatever they want, take the sign down.
Do we have is there a limit on the height of this, and not the height of the sign itself, but the poles that hold the sign? Because I understand this has to go above the tree line. It's not allowed to be, it doesn't really abut the highway. It's got to be set back a little
Right.
bit and be visible from above it. And part of my concern is not the number of people who are going to stand in their backyards and see this, but the number of people who might look out their second floor bedroom windows and be able to see this. And it seems to me like with this being above the tree line the way it is, that the radius of visibility is, if you consider people looking out of a second floor of their homes, might be rather expansive.
The maximum height is, it shall not exceed more than 90 feet. 90 feet in height.
That's the top of the sign.
That would be the top of the sign, right?
Can't exceed more than that. If you go to 100 feet, then you have to put lights on it because you're close to Mansfield Airport.
Right.
You gotta split.
Right. You're going to have to deal, in this area, they would have to deal with, and we would enforce the FAA requirements for height. And I do want to point out that Mike did distribute some designs from 2015, but one of the things I discovered reviewing this is height was one of the things that changed. In 2015, from what I found, the maximum height was going to be 70 feet. Now they're proposing 90
Paul brought this up tonight.
this afternoon.
So I think a couple of the changes that Paul had mentioned to me this afternoon were changes the planning board made the last time. We just took the bylaw as it was proposed, so some of those changes will probably be put back in by the planning board on height.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Do we know how high the tree line is there? I'm just wondering how high, how high above the tree line will we allow something like this to tower?
I thought during the presentation, I thought, it was kind of like tree line and then the sign. So it wasn't towering.
I got that impression as well.
I did too, and then, but that seemed like a presentation of an ideal, not a presentation of what the actual plan was. And it would seem to me that trees grow and you'd be,
No, that's a pretty mature
pretty much
area.
done there.
So,
Okay.
Peter?
So I have a two-story house with a roof. Figure, what's a story, 10 feet? Is it
Yeah.
about?
It could be.
So my house might be 25 feet tall, 25.
25 to
I think
30.
Yeah, single-family house, right,
No, it's
25?
It's about 5 stories, I think.
My house?
No, 90 feet. 90 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, my house is 25, so.
Right, this could be-
Triple that, just think of your house and think of triple it.
Right.
Right.
That's how high this is gonna be in the air.
And this
Just
is,
trying to put it in perspective.
right, and they're proposing to be 500 feet away, minimum from a residence.
I'm not worried about a phone or residence, I was worried about that,
Right, just saying it's
up in the air.
up there. That would certainly be, compared to any building in Norton, that's certainly 90
How would
feet
you
is.
compare this light from this? I don't know how to compare the light, just to try to put it.
So,
So,
at,
the moon, when it's
500
out
feet's
full in
what?
my house,
Yeah.
mine on my deck, I could probably read a book when it's like right there.
well,
Right,
what they said on Thursday night, because I was at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, if you look at this little circle, the little bullseye around the location, this idea of a foot candle
Yep.
is one candle in a completely black room standing 1 foot away.
yeah.
Foot away, right?
So that is the light, the amount of light that is considered 1 foot candle. So at 750 feet away from
Yep.
these signs, it's like 0.03 foot candles of
Okay.
light
Yeah.
projected.
Yeah,
So very minimal.
So again, the presentation, as the guy was saying it, was basically, these are directional lights. So if it's right here,
Yep,
you're gonna see it.
see it?
But if
Up
you're
inside.
where Tom is,
You won't see it.
you won't
Kinda like
see
the
it.
Green lights when you have,
Right.
they look funny.
Right.
So they're
Right, 'cause you're
directing it
driving by.
at the highway.
Yep.
Yep.
So in theory, most of 99% of that light is supposed to hit the highway.
yeah. Again, the challenge is we don't have a proposal in front. I mean, I know that that Mike has received something, well, we don't have anything official. In a way, this is sort of like what we went through with the solar on Cranberry Bogs. We had a very generic, which this is-ish. I mean, it's very specific, 495, 2,000 feet and industrial, but I didn't review this as a project because it could go in a few places. So we have to make sure it's, that we're taking that into consideration. So the lighting issue is a big deal. So right by that bylaw and our site planning requirements, basically you're not no project is supposed to be projecting light on the adjacent property. Not noticeable. It's 0.1 foot candles. So, and again, I think in this case, since it would be, essentially along the freeway and facing the freeway, it probably wouldn't, but, I mean, it's going to be facing the freeway, so, but until we see a project, we better, it's hard to determine it, but I think the point of it is we cannot be creating any adverse lighting impacts on residences.
Conversely, if you're on your looking out your second floor window, you may see the back of it. If you were at your house.
That was my next question was, do we have a sense of how many homes would be able to see it in the day? The back side of it, the front side of it? I mean, we fought tooth and nail to keep a water tower from going in behind, the previous owner of my house fought tooth and nail to keep a water tower from going back. You just want to look at it, right? Big monstrosity behind the house. How many people would be able to would be in their backyard grilling or in their second floor bedroom window looking out the window and just see this thing there in the daytime? How many views are potentially?
Again, how many houses are within the circle, 2,000-3,000 feet away? I don't know.
And how many people go up to their second floor to look around the neighborhood?
More than you might.
I look out my bedroom window and enjoy the view all the time.
Yeah, but we also have to, when we see a project, we'd also have to consider its proximity to 495. I mean, I hear what you're saying, who wants to go out and see that? But is it possible, too, that if they're looking out already, they could be seeing 495 going by? Not to say that we should be adding to that, but, presumably where this is going is not pristine, undisturbed area.
Great view, I gotcha.
Yeah, well, I think it's something we need to keep an eye on, though. Again, this is proposed to be within 2,000 feet of the road. Back in...
That was an amendment, right?
Yeah, again, what I saw from a memo, the original proposal was in 2015 was 500 feet from 495, and now it's 2,000. So I think it gives you some flexibility, but I think this issue of lighting may become more of an issue with 2,000 feet. Again, we'd have to look at it and make sure.
And I think that'll be an amendment that the planning board will also make, because you wouldn't want to be more than 500 feet from 495 anyways, because no one would see his sign.
I mean, that's about half a mile. I mean, not quite, but it's...
Who travels 95 south through Canton? That Motel 6, and there's a electronic sign.
Right there as you're hitting
How far back is that?
It's hard to say
I
because you're
know.
going by it,
Flying by.
if you have good luck,
But,
pretty fast.
I mean, that's the one that I think of.
65,
Yep, I pass
get out of the
that
way.
couple, a lot of times I see the sign when I'm on the commuter train right to Boston.
And as far as Aaron's question, I can't say for sure, but if you look at this plan, I mean, most of the homes on the other side of 495, there's a lot of woods in between
Right.
their homes and 495, and the trees are going to be higher than your second floor. And the same happens on this side. Everywhere that's zoned industrial, There are some homes in the industrial zone that may see it, but they are in an industrial zone. But beyond that, to the first residential neighborhood, there's a lot of woods between them and here.
Right.
Um,
Peter?
Just one other question. So I believe the street we was just popped in my head, Blueberry Knoll. Where is that street on this picture?
These are.
It's not, it's beyond.
Beyond, to the left? Now I got it. And before it was the proposal back in here before or over here somewhere? Before?
Where you first pointed.
Right there?
Yeah.
That's where it was before?
Yeah.
So the circle would have encompassed that street probably? Okay. I'll shut up.
Aaron?
Is the impact of this something that might be easy to test with a drone and a light bulb? Put it where it is and have a look and say, okay, that's where it's going to be, and then you can kind of drive around, visit a few locations, see what, what the visibility impact is? I feel like we're guessing a little bit.
I can't speak to drones, but I would imagine there's computer simulations that could.
It's safer than a ladder, right?
You put up a balloon. That's
Right.
common.
Balloon,
But you
drones
could
work
use a
fine.
computer simulation.
Wants to have like a
It's a
remote
boat.
control.
Yeah.
They're saying anywhere 10 to 12 feet is, per story, so it's pretty high.
My guess is that the biggest problems that anybody's going to have from light, the problems that we have today. Streetlights cause light. What causes even more light are your neighbors who keep floodlights on in their yard all night and sign into your bedroom across the street. I mean, I got a lot of light coming in.
Yeah.
But it's from perfectly legitimate, normal lights, people who want to have lights outdoors on all night. Leave on. Can't do much about it. Equally annoying is the fact that, as we all know, Norton is right in the path for landing at Logan. Now, the planes are high, thank the good Lord, but I can go out in my yard, I've done it. I can go out in my yard and see the headlights coming in. By the time I turn and watch the taillights, I can look back and see the next one coming in. Steady sound of those jets declining. It's not like living in Boston or living near the airport, I don't mean that. But we get used to it. I mean, I've been living there in Norton for 50 years now.
But
You get used to it, it just is part of the environment, but it's an annoyance, I suppose. I know people who, when they first come here, talk about it. We get used to it. I don't think this lighting is going to be as much of a problem as people think that.
We went through this with the signs that they have in front of the gas station, the signs they have in front of the real estate agencies on 123.
Yep.
We went through with the measuring techniques and how you measure the luminance, how many luminance, how many candles. We went through the whole thing. And now they're running full blast. I mean, it was a big concern, but
Right.
all of a sudden the concern is gone. We must have at least a dozen signs on
Yes.
123.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issues of the light itself have been addressed fairly well. I think the
Right.
directional stuff it works, right? We all had that old TV, that you couldn't see from a, 30-degree angle. You really had to look at it dead
Right.
on, or the picture just disappeared on you. I think my concern might be even more just, not the light, but the structure and having it there.
Per sign,
Yeah.
That
and do his maximum.
it's not gonna be pretty, it's gonna be, and if you take the angle from, from a second floor, or, and then you've got, your closest tree is, 50, 60 feet away from the house.
It's not bad at all.
So, the farther away those trees are, because you get some yard space there, that angle gets lower and lower, and the farther and farther you see, and then, it depends what kind of trees you have out. You got oaks, the leaves are gonna fall off. So 6 months of the year, that thing will be staring you dead in the face for a good long.
We're trying.
So, it just, I hope we're being appropriately mindful of the impact on our neighbors. I don't want to see anybody,
Right. But again, I think these are great points, and I think that's one of the benefits of ensuring that we do it through a special permit, because these are the issues that the planning board will have to face when this comes forward. Again, when we're dealing with text, language, obviously, we want to make sure the language prevents negative impacts to the community, because we want to make sure that this isn't creating a a new impact. I mean, certainly dealing with Logan, we have no control over that, but we do have control over this. So we want to make sure that it's written certainly consistently with the state law, but let's also, the benefit of the special permit is, the planning board has the ability to put conditions in there that will address issues that pop up. Again, you're in a tough spot right now because we don't know, we have some possible sites, but until it comes in, we don't know. Again, there could be some other sites that are, a little ways away from here too, that, we need to just keep that on our radar. So, when I'm preparing this for next Tuesday at Planning Board, I'm going to take our zoning map and try to, with our limited technology, try to draw 2,000 feet from 495. So again, Condyne's Blue Star development zoned industrial, and could be a site for it. I wouldn't want to ignore it because of what happens if we get an application for it. So. That was the end of my presentation. Those were all of the applications that are in. Were there any other questions or comments? And I will make that recommendation on the commercial campgrounds and amusement park. That seems like a pretty reasonable recommendation, but I'll let them know that you all have made that request. So they will be Tuesday night. I will make sure you all are meeting Wednesday before.
Yes.
We'll have their report. So I have to draft up the report for Planning Board, and it'll include whatever recommendation they give us.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
all right. Thank you.
Paul? Paul?
I just want to let you know, I did talk to the superintendent today, and he was fine with the budget moving forward the way it is, and also told me that the school department will not be making any amendments. His recommendation is that they don't make any amendments to the budget on town meeting floor. And if, obviously, they may have to come back in the fall, as he said, for money, but as far as now. So I think we only have one other article that you can vote on. And you do have to do your recommendations by Wednesday, so you really have to do them tonight. So as far as the two water and sewer articles, they're not going to be able to come until Monday. And all the zoning articles, I think we put a recommendation in your packet there, draft, just to say no recommendation till further information.
Yeah, no action at this time pending additional
Yeah,
information.
so you'd have to do. So the only other article I have is retirement expense, Article 3, for the spring annual. And this would be a request for $17,500 out of free cash to cover retirement expense.
Is that one person?
Yeah.
What was the amount again?
17,500. Mr. Chairman,
Tom?
I'd like to recommend Article 3. I'd like to move to recommend Article 3 in the amount of 17,500 for free cash, from free cash.
Second.
Motion and a second to recommend Article 3, retirement expenses in the amount of $17,500 from free cash. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
We didn't vote on it.
Unanimous?
Okay, thank you. So do you want to wait until Monday to meet again?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll also see if the developer for the sign can come,
Okay,
give you some more information on that.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
When are we gonna meet?
Thank you.
Bill, I may or may not be here on Monday. Mine's going through the other eye.
Take care of it. Think OPED when he's doing the surgery.
So, Steve has drafted this year's report. So if people can read it and, I guess now, and see if there are any comments. Bonnie?
It says 3.09% increase.
Yes.
Was it 3.09 or 3.90?
Well, that's where we're,
One of the,
that's one of the things we can't seem to foot, is that verbally it was said one way, but based on, I think, last week's packet, it equates to something different. So,
and that's the same on the dollar variance as well. I have to get clarification on that.
so that's kind of the unknown at this point.
Okay. And I did send a text to Bill as well, that if you wanted to know the number of meetings, because that's often a question, it was 14.
That's
That we
less than
met.
usual.
This
We
budget.
can,
That's because we stayed out later.
Yes.
A couple times.
We kept Tom up past his bedtime repeatedly.
And it's wearing on me.
Only one.
so with the 3.09 equals a 540 shortfall?
That's what I was saying. You have to
Yeah.
clarify those numbers. Right now, the numbers that are in there for the final,
Yeah.
the difference is not the 540.
Okay.
So I have to clarify that.
It's probably more.
I have 706
Yeah.
is the difference between.
So why don't we just run with, if we have numbers based on last week's packet, unless someone objects, why don't we just run with what we can foot to and say to someone, this is what we based it on?
Yep.
If you get different numbers before you have to go to print, but we've got to have this done well before Monday, so.
Right,
Right.
and if we're not meeting until Monday, then we need to kind of approve something today.
Chairman,
Paul?
I'd like to move that we approve this report, which I think is very well done, with the understanding that the chair and the vice chair, if they find it is necessary to change a couple of these numbers because of that information that comes in, have our blessing to do so.
Second.
I have
Mike?
just throw this out there. On the bottom of the second paragraph, it says, "We've been fortunate to have enough free cash to support its use." I think we should stress that maybe we won't have that in the future, because it looks like, oh, well, we've always had, the money's always been there. And that's the expectation for every year, because we found out what happened in Plainville. They didn't have their free cash, and, you know, it's like a false, you know, expectation or something, it's just my opinion.
No, and I went back and forth. The problem is, we've had it over the last X number of years, and
I know, and we always say, well, we don't know we're gonna have it next year, but we've,
Right.
to date, always had it next year.
Yeah.
But it's well, it's like everything else, it's not a guarantee.
I think that-
Past performance is not a guarantee of future,
absolutely,
whatever.
I agree.
Michael, is your concern addressed with the use of free cash to balance the budget is risky, as it uses non-recurring revenue to balance current?
Yeah, that
Is that,
says it.
Yeah, it says.
Hmm?
Should not be using non-recurring funds for recurring.
Amy?
expenses.
I just ran the numbers from the packet from last week, and I got 3.8999%.
Which is what I thought they presented,
That's what I heard.
or what Someone presented.
And I will be the first to admit that I am not a math genius, but I took their recommended number and subtracted last year's total budget and then divided that number by last year's total budget, and I get 3.9%.
And how much in dollars is the difference?
706.
706?
Of what they asked for versus what they're getting, or from last year to this year?
Last year to this year.
What they got last year to what they're gonna get this year is the percent increase, right?
Right, and that's like $1.1 million.
So you're
in
getting
change.
that information from the most recent handout?
Yes.
Right, but then.
Because they did make that amendment from the Cherry Street,
Presented.
right? As I understand, there was some number that was able to get included to get to 3.9.
I'm using this printout from 424 that says Finance
Yep,
Committee
424.
recommends.
Yep, that would be it.
29,622,648.
Yep, that would be it.
That's the number.
Yeah.
That's the number.
But what's the shortfall from what we're proposing to what they wanted?
706.
That's
Oh,
the
please.
706?
Yeah.
Okay. And as long as those numbers jive.
Check them out again.
763,343.
Yeah, so
Okay.
706.
That's right on.
Yep.
It's a good report. We vote on this, or-
Mr. Chairman?
And, hold on a sec. And we thank Mike, we thank various boards and departments. We don't necessarily thank Norton Cable Access for allowing this
Sure
to
they can.
happen. So thank you for suffering through this with us.
Thank you, Shane.
Amen.
And also,
Aaron?
John Rainier Norton for being at every meeting and taking notes.
There you go.
Thanks,
There you
Peter.
go, Peter.
In the third paragraph, we address the committee members of the Finance Committee recognize that when a revenue does not keep pace with expenses, the imbalance can be rectified with a Proposition 2.5 override or to keep expenditures within projected revenues. We emphasize the importance of operating within the various recommended budgets, which will require the assistance of the various department heads, committees, and boards. They must operate within the recommended budgets to avoid potential reductions in expenditures and possibly at a later date. We do emphasize that, but I think we've also strongly emphasized repeatedly and out loud from numerous members of this board the need for a Proposition 2.5 override. And I'm wondering if that should be addressed here.
Say the last part again.
We have also emphasized the need for a Proposition 2.5 override to address budget shortfalls, repeatedly and from multiple members of this board. And I'm wondering if that should be stated in our report of the year, because it has been an ongoing theme.
Well,
It's,
in a sense, it's said
Members of the Finance Committee.
with, the imbalance can be rectified with, so it said that that's an option.
That's not saying it's necessary, though, which is what you're saying.
It says it's an option, but then we emphasize that we should be just controlling our costs.
Yes.
But that's not really the message that we've been hearing from a lot of us throughout this process. You know, when Tom throws up his hands and says, the town needs an override in a meeting, I think, so that should be in the annual summary.
Well, I think.
That's our assessment.
We need an override if the town wants expanded services,
Well-
I mean, you just said we need an override. I mean, we've been using free cash for so long, and I mean, we do need an override, but I don't know.
I would say
It's
we're
not expanded, it's,
rapidly approaching the point where we're going to need an override to maintain our current level of services.
Well, we need it now. We take out the free cash. I mean, I
If-
agree, we need it.
If you take out the free cash,
Which I think we should
you
be prepared
have,
to
you
do.
have an unbalanced budget.
Right.
And to balance the budget, you have two options. Override
Or playoffs.
or reduce the expenditures. And I think I've hopefully been somewhat, or hopefully been consistent in my message that you can't approve a contract, you shouldn't propose and approve contracts that you can't afford to pay. So in that sense, you need an override to save someone, or you need an override,
To continue to provide an adequate level of services.
but if you didn't do these contracts over here that you knew from the outset you couldn't afford, if you didn't do that, then do you need this override? I don't know. And that's where I'm now stuck. That departments have approved things knowing that the normal increase does not provide that funding.
And you could argue that the departments approved it, but it was the town officials that actually approved it.
And ultimately, the townspeople. But at the end of the day, do you correct an override and still go down the path of insanity of not checking your expenses? That's my disconnect. An override will solve the problem today,
Right.
but if you continue
The same practice.
the undisciplined same practice, you're going to end there again
Right.
and again and again. So at some point, you need to start to think, hey, that's not the way you do a budget. That's not the way you do contracts. And that's my disconnect. Do I think we need an override? Probably. But I don't want to say we need an override and then continue the insanity.
Wait a minute, what insanity?
The insanity of here are budgets that with 2.5% increases from your levy, you can't afford to pay 3 years down the road. Because your expenses are going up like this, your revenue is going like this. Eventually, your expenses exceed your revenue.
Yeah, but we haven't been doing that. We've been cutting services to stay under that.
But we haven't.
So
Yes, we
Yes,
have.
we have, of course
We
we have.
haven't.
We haven't.
We
don't
still have
enough police departments,
contracts.
we don't have enough teachers.
We
We've been
still
cutting
have
services.
contracts that exceed what we could pay.
Yeah, I understand the chairman's point.
Yeah,
It's
I don't get that.
It's that there are, within the school department, there are steps and lanes and, incentives for increases in teachers' salaries that are built into the teachers' contracts that are going to outpace our, what would be reasonable projected revenues for us based on, a 5, 10, 15-year history.
And please, let's not point out schools.
Okay.
It's contracts in general. Some are better than others.
Yeah.
But it's contracts in
Right.
general.
Right. But at the same token, and I don't want to go down, like, we can end up down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But when that's what they have to do to just maintain basic competitiveness and not let the department fall apart and really decrease in quality, that's where this becomes a damned if you do, damned if you don't. And
Yep.
that's where the only way to solve that damned if you do, damned if you don't is with an override.
Mike?
I understand what you're saying, but also, we have been reducing expenses, because when unions take votes on contracts, they understand that there will be layoffs if some of those contracts are approved. But they're approved knowing that those layoffs will happen. That's the reduction in service. That's how they compensate for those contracts, because there'll be less people that those contracts would affect. So it is, it is, it reaches its balance point. More money, less people.
Paul?
And I think we point this out very clearly in the fourth paragraph down the line, that this is not even a level services budget. Even we're using the free cash, it's not a level services budget. That they're short for, we've budgeted in a shortfall and overtime that we know, we've admitted we're gonna have to deal with in the fall. One way or another, we're gonna have to deal with. And basically what you guys did, and I watched you on television last time, was to accept a similar situation in which the school committee would use budget money assigned for something else, which is going to have to be replaced in the fall, just to get by. And we're already using 600 in free cash.
Right.
And we'll have, the hope is that we'll have enough from next year's free cash. The other side of this is that we have to remember, in terms of the townspeople, you say we shouldn't be using, and I totally agree, we shouldn't be using free cash this way. And you're not supposed to. Every budget advisor I've ever seen said you're not supposed to. And we know from ourselves from the year we had a negative free cash. You're not supposed to. But when the town hears that the auditor sometime in September has certified blump, blump, blump in free cash, and then you could say we need an override. They say, you got all this free cash, for God's sake, why do you need an override?
Exactly.
I mean, they don't understand what the long-term problem of budgeting and really doing things the way you should. But you have to politically understand that if you've got somebody certifying $2 million in free cash, nobody is going to support an override because you use the free cash. You use it all up, it's free cash, use it.
Right, they think we lost
Budgetarily,
it
in
in
the
our
long run, it
collective
doesn't
sock
make
drawer
sense.
and then found it somehow.
But this is a result of, since 1980, we have never had a general override. Most of those years, not just the last few years, but most of those years, the rate of inflation has been well above 2.5%. So this is something that was growing on us, and we were doing to ourselves back in the 80s and the 90s. And it just has continued to escalate. And we'll have to get to the point, I mean, what may happen is you'll get some time when we don't have the free cash or something like that, and all of a sudden there'll be a crisis. We had one of those, remember? I can remember Chief Keene, who we made acting town manager because we were out, we were.
1991.
And he came in here and said, I don't care what you give us, give me the police department, I'll give you what I can give you in police services based upon what you give me. He wasn't gonna get upset at all. You give me this much, I'll give you the service. You remember?
He came in and said, I'm cutting every budget 10%. That was it.
And then,
End of conversation.
and then he made this other statement, he said, you can cut me more. Well, he did, and this is when, if we wanted to call 911, we got Attleboro because the desk wasn't open. The communications was shut down much of the time. We were down to 2 cars on the road. The police department had been cut to under 20 people because that's what we had that year. Because we had no negative free cash. The next year we got some free cash, and of course we used it.
So I
Start building back up again.
So,
I agree with you, Paul.
so
And-
hold on, can the first step here, can we add a sentence that indicates the total town school shortfall from what was proposed to what we've recommended, which will then highlight again, to anybody and everybody who reads this, even with free cash, we're still X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars short of where we need to be.
Well, in other words, we already have a sentence in saying what the Norton Public Schools, we say exactly,
So-
you should just say the same thing.
For the town.
Police and fire, for the
And
town.
add them together,
Yeah, and add them all together.
add them together.
Yep,
So that-
library,
so-
highway, all of them.
And that
right?
wasn't even extravagant. That was a very shoestring budget, added a little bit more.
But that's still a couple hundred, 300,000 more, so in essence, you have $900,000
So if-
gap.
So you're saying add what we said, hey, come to the fall for us, whatever that number in the
budget.
fall they were gonna come to, include that in our shortfall this year, because we should have given it to them now. not
Right.
give us the
Right,
fall.
the necessity was.
Right.
We just
Yeah.
didn't-
So,
COD.
so I think we should add that. I will put to a vote or entertain a motion if people are adamant that they want to see in not so bold letters, but it basically saying we need an override.
I think it's an important responsibility of this committee to communicate the financial needs of the town to the residents.
Time, I'm not gonna lose my cool, it's almost 9 o'clock.
Tom, I'm younger than you.
For at least 15 years, we have said we need an override. 15 years, ladies and gentlemen, okay? How clear can you make it? The only clear way you make it is...
Make it clearer, it's not in
Take
our
the free
report.
cash. It's in every one of our reports. It says we need, only way to get more revenues, we need a Proposition 2.5 override, sorry, we need overtime too. Okay?
Or cut costs, and
Okay.
then we emphasize cutting costs.
Of course
That's
we
what
do.
this says.
That's the proper thing to do. To emphasize
Exactly.
being fiscally responsible, if you can. If you can't, you can't, okay? The problem is, what the people see is, listen, well, I'm not picking on the school, because you know I know it. 800 students less than 10 years ago. 800 students, okay? The budget is inversely proportioned to the product. So the people say, wait a minute, how come their budget keeps going up and they'll have less students? Well, we know what it is, fixed expenses and all that stuff people don't take into account. That you gotta light the building just to walk in here costs you so many thousands of dollars. But that's what people look at. And we can say, we think we need an override, we want to get an override, but the people who've got to say it is the 5 people that sit here, okay, and the 6 people on the school committee, and everybody else, they've got to say it, okay? We can say it in our short little narrative, which is fine. How many people read it?
As-
That's the bottom line.
If you think it's fine, let's do it.
No, but I'm saying
I
is,
think it's important that all the
everybody's
committees,
got to
right?
stand
I
up
mean,
to the plate.
I don't think we should punt this to the Board of Selectmen and the school committee.
It's not punting it. I think it's something that, it's not
We should
just
all
the
do
school
it.
committee.
I think the town people should hear it from the Board of Selectmen, from the school committee, from the police department, from
And
the
they
fire
hear it from
department,
us.
from the highway department, and from the finance committee.
Well, I would just add that I used to work with someone who frequently said to me, subtlety is lost on me, so just be direct. And I think that we are subtly implying in paragraph 3 that we think an override could be an answer to some of our problems, but we're also saying we could just keep cutting costs and that might work too. I think that we're going to come to a point where the cutting of costs is going to become the hemorrhaging of services. And I don't want people out there in TV land and reading this lovely letter that Steve has written in some crazy book that we have to pay money to print to be like shocked when they find out that there's no money to be had. Because I know we, in our own special, subtle way, have been saying for many years that there's not a lot of money to go around, but maybe we need to slap some people over the head with it.
We tried that too.
Wow. I remember, I found
The only thing I would say, I remember Lee, when I first came on, and he used to sit, well, he'd sit here, but then he'd sit there, right there, and I'd be over there.
Between me and Paul.
Right, and he said, well, you know, it'd be great if just, you know, $5 million just came out of the sky, we'd be all set. But then he'd say, well, you know what? But what are we gonna learn once we get the $5 million? And that's what it comes down to. If we keep the same practice, the same principles, that $5 million or that 1.2 or 3.7, we're gonna be going back 4 years from now and saying, you know what? We need more money.
Yeah.
So if you can't address the problem and you're just masking it over and varnishing over with money, that's not gonna do anything.
But
It's
that's not
going
what
to
we're
do
doing.
it.
But
That's not
I
what we're
think
doing.
I would.
Counter that we are one of very
You're dealing
few
with,
communities
look
in Massachusetts.
the demographics
Not
in
that
this
have figured it out
town,
this far.
the demographics in this town have shifted dramatically in the last 5 years, okay? There's a town that I work in, customers' accounts, very similar to our town, a little wealthier. It's called Sudbury.
Lot wealthier.
Okay? But no,
Way,
but
way,
here-
way wealthier.
But here, no, hear me out. Hear me out.
Magnitude
Here's the
wealthier.
issue, okay? When their children graduate from that regional high school, you know what they do? They put their house on the market. You know why? Because the value isn't there for them anymore.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're creating not a town, you're creating a feed-through system. Okay, I want we're not a suburb, not a wealthy town. We want people to enjoy this town and live in this town with all ages, all demographics. It's just not one department.
No,
So I'm not saying it's one department.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, Rick. I guess what I would say is that we are doing all the things that we need to be doing. We are opening a new industrial park. We are trying to attract additional revenue streams and businesses to come to town. And we are trying to plan thoughtfully for a fruitful future for our community. But in the short term, while all of those seeds we are planting are going to need some time to grow, we have an immediate need.
How can you talk to a person that's lived in this town for 50 years and they can't afford $400 more a year?
They've done it in almost every
That's
other
ridiculous.
community around
Where are you gonna live that
Massachusetts.
you don't pay more taxes
You know,
every year?
How are we the
That's
only?
not an excuse anymore.
We're the only community that's
doesn't-
gotten,
that doesn't
the only
fly.
community I know of that's gotten this far without ever passing an override. So, I mean, that bridge has obviously been crossed a lot of times by a lot of places. I think we should-
One thing that, and I'll close out, one thing that I think, what I heard last week from Dr. Byetta, was that he recognized that he was behind the curve when he came in, 1%, 0%, 1.5. And he said, you know what? It is what it is. And it was kind of, we had a 7%, whatever. But didn't he say, I thought I heard him, he said, you know what? I think we've caught up by now. I thought he said that there was going to be a little bit of more, in the next 2 or 3 years, things were going to stabilize.
I don't
Mike?
recall
I
that.
don't recall hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, if let's say we have an override, and then it solves our problems for a couple of years, and then we're gonna need another override. That's because Proposition 2.5 is limited to 2.5. I mean, every year they're saying, okay, you can only increase 2.5%. The only way there's ever gonna be a long-term solution is if they increase 2.5 to some other number that's realistic and takes into effect, into account inflation and contracts. And everything. They're limiting it. No matter what we do, we could, we can have a very high override. Eventually, that 2.5 is gonna get eaten away, and yeah, we're always going to need an override because that 2.5 number is just too low.
But the rate of inflation from '08 to '16, was that 2.5 a year?
No.
Of course
No,
not.
but over.
Wasn't
over the
even
last-
1%.
Over the last, 80 to now, whatever that is, 40 years, you average it all out. The annual rate of inflation for over that 4-year period is a hell of a lot more than 2.5%.
And-
I mean, there were years when it was
Right.
5,
Salary
6, 7.
contracts go up 3%. I know, there's fixed expenses and everything else involved, but a big chunk of our budget is salaries. And that's what you're saying.
That's what
That
I'm
we're
saying.
increasing salaries by 3% when there's a 2.5 cap. It's the 2.5 that's the problem,
Well, but that's,
The override.
But that's what we
for.
have to live with.
that's what you have to
Right,
live with.
exactly.
So the point I
nothing
think
we can do.
Rick is trying to make, and I'm trying to make, is that you don't negotiate a contract that says 3, 4, 5%, knowing you're not gonna get
And then
that
they
money.
reduce the services.
So-
They
so
reduce
it-
the staffing, they reduce.
Right, so as long, I guess, as long as the department, the division is okay with knowing, entering into that contract, that, my 10 people, at the end of the second year, I'm only gonna be able to afford 7 of you, I guess I shouldn't care then. But to me, that's just insanity to knowingly enter into an imbalance. And I don't think people want to address that. It's like, let's just give them X percent and let them worry about it 3 years down the road. Or let's go back to the town and beg for money.
And throw income at it.
To me, that's insanity. And
Well, I disagree. So that point is not universal.
I understand it's not universal, but as I said to someone before, there are certain departments in this town that if they were a borrower of the bank I work at, they would be in the workout department that I'm in. Because their statistics are going down, as Tom said, 800 kids less, their expenses are going up. That's a major disconnect.
But we know where those expenses are going. They're coming from unfunded mandates, they're coming from
It's not
special
all,
education.
it's not all
They're a
unfunded.
big chunk of it that we
It's
have
not
no
all
control over.
unfunded.
We're not overpaying our teachers, we're not overpaying.
We're not underpaying them.
Good.
Exactly,
I don't
so,
want to underpay them, I
So-
want to
And we're
overpay them.
continuing to add
I want good
administration
people
type
working
positions
for
that aren't
us.
teaching positions.
I want good
Continue
people
to do
working
that.
for us, so
That's
that means
fine.
we have to pay them money.
If you can't support the level that you're hiring these.
We need an
interns,
override then.
Then stop. That's not the case.
We need an override.
That's not the case. I can throw money at anything, spend what you want.
Yeah.
Not
The
end.
choices are override or a decline in quality, right? I
Well,
mean, that's it.
You look at
And
every
so
model.
it's
Where's the need of the
in every
schools?
department, right?
Could we, and I know some people at the table here don't necessarily buy in, but maybe the school should have a stabilization account.
Oh, I'm for that.
I think, you know what? And that we should make a commitment to that. We absolutely should. And we should put a lot of attention to that, to make sure that's met, so then general education doesn't suffer. But just, and maybe, at the end of the day, an override probably would be needed. But I just worry that if you don't change what we're doing now, it's just varnishing a problem over. That's all
We're
it's
having,
doing.
we're having, a good conversation about budgetary responsibility. But each person, as they speak about that budgetary responsibility, also concedes, yeah, we probably do need an override. Well, just let's make that very clear in here, that we're behind the 8 ball, we're facing a shortage, that to maintain a level of services in this town to which we have grown accustomed, we're going to need a Proposition 2.5 override to maintain that. Or we're going to be facing cuts, and I don't want cuts to any of the departments in this town, and I mean any of them. I don't want someone, driving, over a bunch of potholes, wondering why they're not getting fixed because the highway department just doesn't have enough people, materials, whatever, to get it done. To be surprised that we didn't have the money to fund it. Let's tell them we need a Proposition 2.5 override to make this happen.
Paul?
Keep
Yeah,
this thing
I
running
think
smoothly.
we talk about funding level services and this, and I think we're sometimes using an inappropriate term. And what I like to think of as an appropriate level of services that we need to live and to have the ambulance services that will really be effective in the town, to have the schools and, schools still have to run grades kindergarten through 12, no matter what size they have, and that adds to curricular expenses And the electronic age has not made education cheaper, that's for sure. From when I went, but I will not think that we have appropriate services in the school system until the day when they don't have to pay for busing and they don't have to pay for sports.
Amen.
I never had to pay, my parents didn't have to pay for it. I didn't have to pay for it for my 3 kids going through Norton Public Schools. I think it is wrong. And we're not the only ones doing it. Every town and community around is doing it. But you can't tell me that we have what I would call appropriate level of service as long as we're doing that sort of thing. And we're cutting and nudging and doing things in a lot of budgets that way. And it
Our Parks and Rec
catches up,
budget
it catches
is a
up with us
joke.
in time.
So
Town
the
is
highway
gonna
budget.
continue to grow, the building has started in this town, we're gonna, more people demanding, I'm not talking about schools, I'm talking about police and fire and all the other kinds of services we want. You wanna keep level services when you're serving more people, that's another hard way of looking at the issue. So, I don't have an but the one thing I am convinced of, because of all of the times we tried overrides, the ones that failed, and been several of them, is that the real drive for an override has to come from the general populace, a little revolution, if you will, or maybe a big revolution. They can petition the selectmen with a certain amount to hold a town meeting for an override. They can do all sorts of things. As long as it's just the selectmen, the school committee, the finance committee, and some of these other governing officials, as we theoretically are looked at as being, saying, we need more money. They'll just say, that's the government. They always want more money.
I think that's part of the problem. We had in the
And
past, the Board of
I just
Selectmen
think
and
the
the
day
Finance
will have to
Committee haven't.
come, the day will have to come when there'll be a groundswell of public opinion drive for this that gives it a basis for support that you weren't going to get as long as it's those of us who were here in various capacities are the main ones saying it, no matter how often we say it.
They don't believe us. Bottom line is, they don't believe us. Okay?
Well, let's make it more clear in our report.
Oh, I don't think it has to be any clearer than that. I don't care if you make it fluorescent, okay? You can make it painted yellow. Put it on green paper.
I
Blue?
I
No?
think part of
Red paper.
making it clearer is to show the total gap that we were unable to fund,
Yeah.
That we thought was reasonable.
that we thought was reasonable. And as you clearly stated, not one presentation that came before us was unreasonable. I can
We can
think
throw
of one.
largely in there to get out of the weeds of debate with anybody who wants to.
Yeah.
So,
So add a few numbers of that sort with the totals.
Yeah.
And that's.
What the total fall
That,
is.
that will emphasize the problem without arguing, we need something that immediately turns them totally off.
off, right.
We already sort of are saying, implying that up here, but
Right.
maybe add more of that aspect to it. Other than, I mean, I think this is a fine report, but I do think we could add that
Just
to
the
it.
shortfall.
Yeah.
What the shortfall is between what they wanted
Yeah,
and what we gave.
between the level services
And what we gave.
and that this is not really a level services budget.
Right.
Not because of free cash or anything else, it's not even with the free cash, it's not a level services budget. It would be
Right.
worse if we didn't have the free
We'd have
cash.
free
in it.
cash, it'd be definite layoffs.
Right.
But, so if you can say a little of that sort of stuff, in it, it might be good. But otherwise, I think you guys gotta go ahead and get the thing ready, because they need it, it's gotta be out
Right.
in time for,
So, a motion,
You made a motion, I made second.
my motion is that we do all of these things that we've been talking about.
And I second that.
Everything, Paul?
All right, then.
Well, I empower the chair and the vice chair to be selective in their choice.
Whatever you want.
In their choice.
All right.
All right, then. I have a motion, I have a second. We're adding basically a few line items of, to emphasize the total
Shortfall.
budgetary shortfall townwide.
So we're saying, take out anything referencing just the schools here, but go strictly townwide.
Well, I would give both.
Both, yeah.
I would give
Okay.
both.
I want to make sure that's what I'm
Take what the
doing.
department
That's what I'm
requested.
doing here.
Yeah, minus
Do
we
what you
gave
did
them.
for the schools, do the
And
same
do it
thing
for the
fire
town.
and police and say,
Just give one number. Say
Yeah,
town
you
shortfall.
gave
or the
the,
town shortfall for,
the schools have a shortfall of X, then do the same for the town side, and then the final sentences, this budget
Yeah.
is in essence short 700 to $1 million, somewhere in that.
to continue really providing level services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's over $1 million short.
Level services that still mean $350 to ride the bus. So that doesn't,
Yeah, but when they
level
keep putting
services,
admins
it doesn't
in
even
there,
solve
it's not
Paul's
mandates
gripe
either,
about
so-
fees.
They're making the decisions.
So, I have a motion, I have a second. I think I've explained the changes in essence. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor of this report as amended? Good. All those opposed? One opposition. Do you want to just state what the opposition is?
I supported Aaron's point. I think we should hit him on the head with it. Don't pussyfoot around. We've got to be on record with a cut and dry statement, I think. So that's my objection. And even adding the budget items, that no one's going to understand that. I want a line in there that says, we recommend an override. And even if it takes 10 years, if we've got 10 years of record of that, I'd be happy with
I
that.
think we're uniform.
We've done it before. We can do it again. I don't
All
care.
right.
The votes.
Do we have any minutes? We do?
Yes.
Wait,
Oh, jeez.
Careful what you ask.
yeah.
Want to do them
it's-
now?
It's,
Nine.
it's almost 9 o'clock.
Tom's bedtime.
I've really pushed it.
9 o'clock.
Mr.
I've
Chairman?
really,
I
I've
make a
really
motion we go
pushed it
watch
the
the
last couple of meetings.
Yeah, nobody tell me what that score is, please.
Now, I do have a question, though. Some of the
Yes.
older minutes that I'm doing,
Yep.
I mean,
That's how you can find it.
I don't remember what happened 5 days ago. I don't know how you all remember from a year ago. If we send those out,
Yeah,
can you do an approval, a quick approval at a meeting saying these are all, I don't know how to,
No, we still have to,
all right.
at least,
I just didn't know what the correct
Your
procedure.
point is well taken.
We may have
because no one,
Thank
to have a
you.
meeting just to approve minutes.
They will, I've got, plus I haven't, somebody
We're meeting
made,
Monday, right?
we are meeting Monday.
Monday it's not.
Best player in
We are meeting Monday.
Yes, Mike,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
Mike
So
said
disappointed.
that may have more
We might,
information.
for that planning,
Yes,
the lights and.
and then, so there's no meeting this Wednesday.
No meeting Wednesday.
There's a
I have
meeting
me-
Monday,
No meeting
and then there's a meeting
Wednesday.
Cool.
Wednesday at
have
6.
Baseball, soccer, and SPO.
And I think we have agendas out for all that
And the meeting on Wednesday.
probably
is
Michelle's
6
been
o'clock.
doing them.
Yep.
at the high school.
Yeah.
There will be.
So, I'm sorry, nothing Wednesday,
Nothing this Wednesday,
We do have Monday
Monday
the 13th.
here.
So that's
13th.
15 meetings.
Yeah.
What?
That's 15 meetings then, because it didn't include.
So nothing this coming Wednesday, Monday here at 7, Wednesday at the high school at 6, because we'll have those 4 planning board things to discuss.
to approve, to recommend.
And then beyond that, if there, as scheduled, is a town meeting on the 3rd and an election on the 18th, what would our schedule be? Just to project out commitment to meetings.
So after the town meeting on the 15th, then I know Mike, unless it dies at the next selectman meeting, which was kind of on the fence,
Right, that's not till the 16th.
we will have a presentation from the building committee.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, I think we'll just go back to once a week, I think, because that's the only thing on the special town.
When will that presentation be? The 13th?
No, it'll be after the
After.
15th.
I got you.
So it's probably the week after,
Monday, the,
Monday or Wednesday, I don't know
So
yet.
there's only
Okay.
one article on the special?
It's only one article.
They had three.
it's included in the packet, too, if you want to see how it's written.
Well, that's when I saw it. It was just-
The last page
Yeah.
of the packet.
So I know we'll have that building committee meeting regarding that. I don't think there's really much else to discuss, and I don't know if that's a one meeting
Right.
meeting, or whether that gets carried over to something else.
Okay.
Again, the Board of Selectmen, at the Board of Selectmen meeting last Thursday, it was brought up, can this be postponed? And I don't know where that
Who's that? Yep.
is gonna
Fall.
fall out.
Yep.
Yeah, they can,
It's their article, they can pull the article.
yeah,
Right.
it's not a petition article.
Not a petition.
So if, for those who weren't there, and for anybody who wasn't bored enough to watch the replay, I was pretty much on the record at the selectmen meeting saying, I don't think you have given the town enough information to support this meeting and this article. Whether they want to continue with it, I don't know. So it may die. I don't know.
What they want to do.
Beyond that, I think after the special town meeting, as I said earlier, I think there are things, I think there's information out there, whether it's from what Mr. Kimball sent to us, whether it's from what Dr. Baeta sent to us. There's a ton of information out there on what other towns, their makeup, what they spend on, what they don't, the population, this, that, and the other thing, that I think we should dig into, and I think would help going into the next budget to say, these are things that I think should be addressed. And I think you, as department chairs and whatnot, should be able to answer for us. Because again, I think there were questions that were at least relayed to me and that were forwarded that were never really answered. So I think if we perhaps have that entering next season going, hey, be prepared, this is what we want to see. So I think that could be a few meetings between sometime in June and September when we truly pick up again for the fall meeting.
And you'll have one meeting right after the 1st of July inevitably that.
Right.
Right.
is-
Right.
Housekeeping.
Pair that with-
Housekeeping
Yes.
for the first week or so in July.
It's got to be then by
Right.
law.
So,
Wait, that week. Me too. So the
anybody else?
No, it's
Tom?
Seeing the lateness of the hour. Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Always a unanimous vote. Thank you.